Carve a few Chinese lattice windows to frame the harmony between heaven and humankind.
Build a long corridor of the East to reach the innermost depths of history and culture.
It is a meandering melody of Suzhou music, sung with grace and elegance.
It is some simple sketches of mountains and forests, not wanting in detail and delicacy.
Pick 1,000 pieces of lakeside rock in all shapes and contours.
Take a share of the Suzhou waters with all the mist and haze.
Paint a dozen scrolls of floral light and watery shadow.
Write a few chapters about the fading years and distant times.
Kongshu Opera is the ultimate of high culture in Chinese music theater. Its birthplace is no other than Kunshan in metropolitan Suzhou. For various reasons, Kongshu never became popular like the proverbial swallows that used to circle around the halls of the noble mansions, but now fly into the commoners' houses. But it did develop into a theatrical genre with far-reaching influence and produce such immortal works as the Peony Pavilion. It is undeniably one of Suzhou's contributions.
The Peony Pavilion has given us these lines, sung by the female protagonist, Du Li Niang. If you have never been to a garden, how could you know what spring is like? Many other classical Chinese operas are also related to gardens. Operas have taken gardens as their motifs. Operas have also been sung in the gardens. There is a natural affinity between the two. The 36 Mandarin Ducks Hall in the humble administrator's garden was where the garden's owner entertained his friends with kunchi performances. The washing the tassel waterside pavilion of the master of fishing nets garden and the lotus scent pavilion of the Garden of Happiness had similar theatrical functions.
In his work, Temporary Deposits of Random Thoughts, the Qing Dynasty writer Li Yu puts forth many original ideas about traditional opera and garden art. He thinks that just like the structural design of a garden, the structure of an opera should be such that it has both tortuousness and depth. There should be twists and turns, as well as directness, ups and downs, as well as smoothness. Li Yu's emphasis on tortuousness manifests one of the aesthetic principles of the East.
The layouts of classical gardens in Suzhou share one common feature in that they generally consist of two parts, the residential complex and the garden itself. The residential area tends to be closed in, whereas the garden area is more open. The two are both independent and complementary, separate yet interconnected. Similar to the big mansions seen in the lower Yangtze Valley, the architecture of the residential complex of a Suzhou garden is generally laid out sequentially along a central axis, beginning with the entrance hall, then the main hall, the inner hall, the study, the plant yard, so on and so forth. This traditional format of residential architecture was developed over a long period of time for clan housing, It is still quite well preserved in the humble administrator's garden, the lingering garden, and the master of fishing nets garden. Because of the sequential arrangement of the courtyards, as one enters this kind of residential complex, one gets a sense of its hidden depths.
The architecture in the garden area, on the other hand, is laid out very differently from the residential area. Not one single part of the layout can be called regular or symmetrical. In fact, asymmetry, irregularity, imbalance, imperpendicularity may be considered the overarching principle of garden design with a view to avoiding repetition and achieving variety, as well as the effect of reclusiveness. The buildings in the garden are either clustered together or scattered. They vary in size, but they all stand near the hillocks or the water surface as part of the landscape. These are the gems of garden architectural art. Just because they have become classic masterpieces, these buildings have become the hallmarks of some of the gardens. Take, for instance, the Hall of Distant Fragrance in the humble administrator's garden, the Tower of Bright Zither in the lingering garden, the Moon Arrives, Wind Comes pavilion in the Wash the Tassel Waterside pavilion in the Master of Fishing Nets garden.
Ancient Chinese architecture encompasses a great variety of structures, lounges and halls, studios and parlors, towers and terraces, kiosks and waterside pavilions, etc., etc. But as far as Suzhou garden architecture is concerned, except for 3 types of structures, the pavilion, the corridor, and the tower, all of which have quite distinct definitions, most of the buildings that bear the great variety of names have no definitive models to be based upon. The names merely give the buildings a touch of antiquity. That is why very few buildings in the Suzhou gardens are exactly alike.
But to approach these buildings, the path is tortuous. One may have to go through all kinds of entrances, walk through a variety of corridors, stroll across courtyards planted with flowers and grass, pass through alleyways along spotless white walls. All this is a physical journey, now bright, now dark, now wide, now narrow, until finally one reaches the aha moment of sudden openness. It is this experience that gives us opportunities to explore the different dimensions and images of these architectural masterpieces. In traditional Chinese culture, tortuousness has the philosophical connotation of comprehensiveness. But the tortuous roots of the gardens often suggest a sense of mystery. Mountains and waters seem to spell the dead end, but behind the shades of willows, flowers suddenly brighten up. Such an aesthetic experience is also an allegory of human life.
I know a thing or two about European gardens. I've lived there for over 60 years, and I have seen gardens in France and Britain. Most of those are royal gardens, large in scale. Our gardens are private, small, and exquisite. So they are exact opposites. Their gardens look huge at a glance. Ours are meandering. That's why I feel the Chinese gardens are very special. Especially the urban gardens. From outside the garden walls, you have no idea what's inside. Once inside, you go, this is special. So that's another difference. European architecture is in most cases obvious to the eye at the first glance. Our Chinese architecture is different.
Among the classical gardens in Suzhou, some are known for their rockery or mountainscape, such as the mountain villa of circular grace. Some for their waterscape, such as the Master of Fishing Nets garden, and some for both mountain and water, such as the humble administrator's garden. Whichever kind of garden you visit, you only have to pay a little attention, and you will discover some common rules of garden art. The secret of mountain and water design is containing the big in the small, whereas the routes for visitors are always characterized as meandering paths leading to deep recess.
Meandering paths leading to the deep recess has become a set pattern for garden designs. The Qing dynasty scholar Yu Yu actually named his garden Chu Yuan, the meandering garden, and called himself by the style name Yu Chu Yuan. The name not only points to the zigzag shape of everything in this narrow and small garden, be it the pond, the rockery paths, the corridors, it is also pregnant with the profound meaning of garden aesthetics. The meandering paths are scenic spectacles in and of themselves. They enhance the depth of the perspective, multiply the layers of scenic beauty, and create a continuous sense of novelty amidst the ever-changing scenery. If we consider meandering paths leading to deep recess a unique feature of the gardens, the key to the mystery of recess lies in the word conceal. Without concealment, there is no deep recess to speak of. The humble administrator's garden is divided into three parts: the East Garden, the Central Garden, and the West Garden. The original main entrance was accessed through a long and narrow alley. After entering the main entrance, you come to the second entrance, also known as the midriff entrance. Entering the midriff entrance, you are confronted by a hillock built of yellow stone rocks, which serves as a screen blocking the view of the entire garden. This trick is called concealing before revealing in garden art.
Chapter 17 of A Dream of Red Mansions describes how, upon completion of the prospect garden, Jia Zheng, the patriarch of the Jia family, takes his son Bao Yu and the others on a tour and gives names to the different scenic spots. This is what the author Cao Xueqing has to say. So, Jia Zheng ordered the gate to be opened, and everyone filed in. Right in front of them, a verdure-clad hill stood in their way. Jia Zheng commented, "If it weren't for this hill, the entire scenery of the garden would be exposed to view as soon as we entered. What fun would there be left?" What he is referring to is the very concept of concealment through tortuousness. Many specialists on the Red Mansions have said that the way Cao Xueqing depicts the prospect garden is due to the influence of the humble administrator's garden, a part of which had been in the possession of the Chao family. The garden must have left an impression on the young Cao Xueqing. Perhaps it was because of this experience of Chao's that the novel bears so many imprints of Suzhou. Indeed, the first chapter begins with the Changmen area of Suzhou. The district around the Changmen Gate is reckoned one of the 2 or 3 wealthiest and most fashionable quarters in the world of men.
One might use a Buddhist phrase to describe the Suzhou Gardens' encapsulation of the big in the small, and that is Mount Sumeru contained in a mustard seed. Mount Sumeru is where all the Buddhists meet. Its space is infinite. A mustard seed is just a tiny vegetable seed. It is mystery par excellence for Mount Sumeru to be contained in a mustard seed. Buddhism came to China from India during the East Han Dynasty and gradually became a mainstream belief system among the Chinese. From the South and North dynasties down to the Ming and Qing dynasties, Buddhist temples and monasteries spread all over the country. Buddhism seeks tranquility. Its monasteries are therefore mostly situated in places where the mountain air is clear and the waterscape is beautiful. Even the temples and monasteries in the bustling cities have their own gardens in order to create a tranquil environment for themselves.
Xiyuan, the Western Garden in Suzhou, is a famous Buddhist garden that includes both the Jiechanglu Temple and the Western Garden itself. Thanks to the reputation of its garden, the whole temple complex goes by the name of the garden. As far as the landscape goes, there is not much difference between temple gardens and scholar gardens. Historically, due to changes of ownership, the same gardens could be temple gardens at one time and private gardens at another. The Lion Grove Garden in Suzhou is a case in point. It was originally built by the Chan monk Tianru during the Yuan dynasty. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, it changed hands several times until it became the family shrine garden of the Beis or Peis. Mr. I.M. Pei has visited the garden many times during his trips to China.
The hillocks in the Lion Grove Garden are among the best-known rockery clusters in classical Chinese gardens. They have 4 routes, which take the visitors through caves, over bridges, and along crisscross and zigzag paths. First-time visitors often find themselves lost in a maze.
Many of the classical gardens in Suzhou take on names that smack of the literati, such as the humble administrator's garden, the master of fishing nets garden, the pavilion of surging waves garden. But the name Lion Grove Garden is totally religious. Why is it called that? First of all, it was because the monk who built the garden, Chan Master Tianru, gave this name to commemorate his teacher, a monk named Zhongfen, who practiced at the Lion Cliff on Mount Tianmu, Zhejiang Province. Secondly, according to Buddhism, the place where the Buddha used to sit and teach his sutras is called the Lion's Platform, and his lecturers are called the Lion's Roar. Then there's a third meaning. The monk who built the garden was particularly fond of rocks that look like lions. There are lots of rocks in this garden that look like lion cubs. That's how the garden got its name. The word grove, as in lion grove, also refers to the place where Buddhist sutras are taught. In Chan Buddhism, temples and monasteries are also called groves or forests. So from the name Lion Grove, we can see how the religious connotations of Buddhism are assimilated into the naming of a garden. Rockery takes up about 2/5 of the total space of the Lion Grove Garden, a considerable proportion of a classical garden. I think it's mainly a manifestation of Chan Buddhist concepts. The hillocks have 21 caves and 9 paths. They seem very intricate, but at the end of the day they all converge onto the main route. That's what's called all things return to one.
Among the various types of winding walkways in the Suzhou Gardens, one cannot but give special attention to the different kinds of corridors built along the hillocks and waters. They are not only the paths for garden tours, but also works of art in their own right, leaving deep impressions on every visitor.
The corridors in the Suzhou Gardens may be divided into open corridors, half corridors, double corridors, and finally floral corridors, which are covered with vines and other kinds of plants. They meander through hills and across waters. In the hot and rainy weather characteristic of this region, they provide shelter for visitors even as they enhance people's interests in the gardens they are visiting. They also serve the function of providing spatial boundaries in an unobtrusive manner. For all these reasons, corridors have been used extensively in garden building. The wave-like waterside corridor in the western part of the humble administrator's garden is a masterpiece among Suzhou's garden corridors. Its undulation and meandering create a gentle and graceful curve. The artistic beauty of the corridor and the atmospheric quality of the water coalesce to make a softness, a rhythm that has become the classic model of meandering paths leading to deep recess in garden art.
The winding corridors lend depth to the gardens, but the deep recess of a garden is not completely closed to the outside world. In order to enhance the depth of field in the limited space of an urban garden, the creative garden builders resort to the technique of borrowed scenery, whereby distant scenery is incorporated into the garden's landscape. Looking out from the humble administrator's garden at the distant North Temple Pagoda, it looks as if the pagoda was made for the garden, with the reflections of the corridor shimmering in the water and the image of the pagoda standing tall against the sky. Isn't this a corridor of heavenly vista?
Besides its architecture, everything in a Suzhou garden, the plants, the rockery, the water surface design, is a work of art. Let me give a simple example. The ground. Nothing can be simpler than the ground. Indoors, the ground is paved with square tiles, but outdoors in a Suzhou garden, it becomes part of the garden art. What do we call this? It's called pavement of flower lanes. The gifted artisans use simple building materials or waste materials such as broken tiles and broken pieces of porcelain, as well as cobblestones to create exquisite mosaics. The patterns so created blend well into the beauty of the garden. Take, for instance, the loquat orchard in the humble administrator's garden. In here, there is an inscription, ice and jade vase, on the hall of dappled green. It describes the serene beauty of the environment as well as the moral purity of a person. How is this represented? You see, the ground here is paved with white cobbles and bricks to form patterns of ice cracks. After the rain, the place looks as pure as ice and jade. Very beautiful. Another example. On the white walls, we often see slabs with calligraphic inscriptions. I think it's quite ingenious. The walls serve as partitions between the garden and the residential complex, so it would not be appropriate to have openings in them. But then the wall surface would look monotonous. The device used is called filling the blank. The owners of these gardens collected works of famous calligraphers and asked highly skilled artisans to engrave them on the stone slabs, like the ones in the Garden of Happiness, the Lingering Garden, and the Lion Grove Garden. These exquisite works of art not only break the monotony of the blank walls, but bring additional artistic charm to the garden.
Most of the garden owners of the Ming and Qing dynasties had their days of glory and opulence, as well as days of decline. When they retired, they did dream about becoming farmers or fishermen, but never did they actually want to plant beans at the foot of the southern mountain or go angling on the cold river. What they desired was a material and spiritual life of quality. This dual-layered lifestyle found concentrated expression in the gardens in the form of garden dwelling that is at once affluent, elegant, and leisurely. The meandering in the deep recess is part of this dwelling experience.
With the passage of time, such opulent and fashionable lifestyle has long ceased to be. The music and song have faded from the courtyard, the lights taken down from the tower and terrace. But it did leave its marks in a variety of ways, one of which lies in the furnishings of the garden buildings. These furnishings served the most mundane needs of the owners in their daily life, and can therefore most directly mirror the styles of garden dwelling at the time.
The architecture of the Suzhou gardens rarely uses any bright colors. Almost all the buildings have white walls and black tiles. They may look plain and simple, but in some of the large halls with high ceilings, because of the owner's economic strength, not only does the architectural structure look magnificent, but the interior furnishings are also a display of classic taste.
Except for some modern imitations, most of the furniture and other articles of daily use we now see in the garden buildings have been collected and restored over a long period of time. Some of these are originals from the time when the gardens were first built. These hard-to-come-by antiques from centuries ago embody the philosophical concepts as well as cultural traditions of ancient times. In his book, Ashes of Brocade, Mr. Wang Shengtang comments, "It is no accident that people are paying special attention to ancient Chinese furniture. As far as its best specimens are concerned, it has reached unsurpassed perfection in terms of its simple structure, its plain form, its clear-cut contour, its exquisite carvings, and its quality timber." The same can be said of the furnishings in the Suzhou garden buildings.
The exquisite beauty of furnishings is indeed the epitome of the classical gardens in Suzhou. Take any piece of antique furniture. If you just look at it, what you get is a sense of classic elegance and grace. But if you touch it, you will feel its smoothness and ease, its substantiveness and class. This is actually not just true of Suzhou gardens. The appreciation of any work of art involves a holistic experience. Only through a holistic experience, comparable to walking along winding paths to the innermost recess, can you appreciate its true value. And the true value of art is revealed only through the polish of time.
Chinese gardens are the synthesis of traditional Chinese culture. For example, Bai Zhuyi, Liu Zongyuan, Ni Yunlin, Wen Zhenming, and many others. They were either poets or painters, but they also built their own gardens. Li Yu, for instance, built the Garden of Mustard Seed. So these men of letters, these artists, they all built gardens. The tradition of Chinese gardens is therefore an integral part of Chinese literary and artistic tradition. I feel that the gardens in Suzhou are saturated with poetry and painting.
Many people today get to know about classical gardens from watching movies and TV programs on historical themes. These gardens serve only as backdrops. For so many years, the classical gardens in Suzhou have been just like the young ladies of ancient times, living a quiet and cultured life in their reclusive boudoirs. Such a lady has both the grace of high birth and the charms of modesty. But just because of her introvert character, where the muses of literature, drama, calligraphy, painting, and other arts grabbed for their seats, somehow she got left out.
It was probably the composite nature of garden art which made it difficult to place her in a given category. Only when one suddenly turned to look back did one see, in the dimming lights of festivity, that a seat should have been reserved in traditional Chinese culture for a muse called classical garden art. However, all the seats have been taken. Maybe for the gardens of Suzhou, reclusiveness is by nature the best seat.
If we think of traditional Chinese culture as a garden, then the art of the real garden is a small garden within the garden. Limited as its size may be, it can reach out to any other realm in the garden of traditional culture.
Strolling in the ancient city of Suzhou, one may sometimes hit upon these analogies. If the houses of the commoners along these alleys may be likened to simple folk songs, then the classical gardens with all their winding paths and deep recesses are like elegant poems. If we look into all those ancient classics that depict deep-set courts with secluded yards, we can always find their correspondence in the Suzhou gardens. One can imagine how the owners and builders of the gardens meticulously constructed the halls and lounges, the towers and pavilions, the kiosk and terraces, as if they were composing lines of poetry, and how they actually turned these buildings into poetic masterpieces. The Song Dynasty Che poet Qin Guan has written this verse titled, to the tune of Huan Xi Sha. A faint light chill creeps up the little bower, overcast at dawn, gloomy like deep autumn, mist and brook on the painted screen, a tranquil scene. Falling petals fly at ease, ethereal like dreams, endless drizzle fine as sorrow, the jeweled curtain hung idly on a tiny silver hook. Such is the ambience of Song Che poetry. Such also is the ambience of the classical gardens. In the tranquil, elegant, leisurely, and delicate recess of a secluded courtyard, one can easily pick up the fallen petals of Song Che poetry.